don't think we need to get into that. Again, we covered it in depth on the show last night. We haven't really touched on Wayne Rooney's retirement from playing. I mean, to a degree, he had already retired, and maybe the discussions have been had about Rooney and his playing legacy, but it's official now, he has retired. And it's interesting, you really have to go a long way to find anyone, Dan, who says Wayne Rooney fulfilled his potential. So maybe the question is, to what extent didn't he?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, it's funny, just before we started the show, like I was sort of just flicking through sort of the news of the evening, and you see Wayne Rooney as the manager. Like Derby won today, talking about Jason Knight, the young Irish player, describing him as a manager's dream. And you sort of have to almost check yourself, and maybe it's just an age thing, our sort of rough age, like to imagine Wayne Rooney like using those terms, I suppose when you grow up, you perceive a manager to be something, but I don't know what you think of when you think of Wayne Rooney. Like, I don't think of Wayne Rooney as like a sort of a grizzled football man. Like, I think there's always a bit of Wayne Rooney for me that's probably tied in a small bit with early Wayne Rooney. And that's just a personal feeling on it. But did he ever achieve what we expected early Wayne Rooney to be? And I think it's hard to say that that's the case, really. Like, it's always the way. Like, I think I'm touching this the last few days. There's almost like there's a cycle in every footballer with longevity, like their career, that they burst on the scene and they're amazing. They eventually have some kind of rut where they hit the ropes a small bit, and then at the end in their swan song, they're a legend. And we'll take we took him for granted. We'll miss him when he's gone. And look, that's an arc that Ryan Giggs and a lot of them have like gone on a similar one. But with Rooney, it's sort of I wonder in like 20 years' time, will he be mentioned in the sort of the top all time? As much as he's top of the English all time record goal scorer and Manchester United records and all this, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to be remembered like in the same way that Bobby Charlton or Dennis Law or various people will be. But maybe that's our own age bias, like in a way being overly harsh, and that his career will stand like the test of time in terms of how it's judged. Maybe because we lived through the time where he was expected to be amazing. There's a sense of deflation, but in 20 years' time, like, is it just going to be, wow, look at his records?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, if you were just to see the highlights of Rooney the way you do with Bobby Charlton, for instance, and then you see the numbers, 250 Manchester United goals alone, like forgetting all the others, 250 for United, 53 for England in 120 appearances, then you would say, well, how do you surpass that? Like, how can it get any better? And yet you do listen to John Giles, for instance, who will say Bobby Charlton's pretty much the best player he's ever seen. Or, in terms of being on the pitch where they're played against, or in English football, certainly. I don't have his exact ranking when it comes to the likes of Messi and Maradona and Ronaldo and so on. But he has Charlton on that pedestal. And with Rooney, and you'll probably touching it with Nathan tomorrow or on Thursday potentially, he also shares that sense of unfulfilled potential. So I don't think so. I think to your point, I think there is something, unfortunately, with Rooney which has fallen short, as ridiculous as it is to say that when you look at the numbers, and to be fair, the longevity, because his lifestyle has been much criticised, and you would see him in photos smoking or doing whatever, and you would think, well, he's not going to last the test of time. But in fairness, he had an unbelievably long career, and you have to remember how young he started, and that's half his problem, isn't it? Like, just how thrilling he was when he started. Like, everybody who was watching football in October 2002 remembers the goal against Arsenal and David Seaman, and the commentary remember the name Wayne Rooney. And then quickly, I remember around that time, Rooney was like the youngest player to score in the Premier League or broke some record. And at the same time, James Milner did something similar for Leeds, and it was like, wow, my God, what's happening? But unlike Milner, who, by the way, is a phenomenon in his own different way, but unlike Milner, Rooney built on the spectacular start and just kept building for a while. I mean, Euro 2004, again, as we remember, it was electric. And here's where the Ronaldo thing comes in. He looked between '02 into '04 and even into the start of his United career as well, that hat-trick on his debut against Fenerbahce, he looked like he would become what Ronaldo became.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, he was thrilling, and like that injury that time, it was like there was almost Michael Owen parallels to some degree. It's like here's another player, suffering an injury at an inappropriate time, and probably never got back to that level. Like 6 years later, Wayne Rooney, if you remember, is coming off the pitch. I think when England played Algeria in Cape Town, screaming at the camera to the fans back home. Like stop booing us, stop jeering us. They drew nil on. You're thinking, like, this is like what he represented 6 years on, and now it's almost like he'd come to symbolise that generation's inability to maybe deliver, that English generation's inability to deliver on their potential. Almost like didn't almost seem happy or something, And
well, it's funny. Starting to on 10, like that's a really interesting career point to dive into, because what in 10 he's about 25, I make it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And so, there's a whole confluence of events then against Bayern Munich. I just remember this period really well. Certain periods of football you're really into it and it sticks in your head. And he did his ankle ligaments and they rushed him back. There's no question. They rushed him back that time, and his ankle just wasn't right. And I don't think it was right at the World Cup. And then, of course, and this is part of the Rooney. I was going to say the Rooney story, but it's also part of the Rooney perception around that time. And he knew it was coming, and I suspect it's why he appeared so unhappy. There was all sorts of tabloid revelations about his private life about to hit the shelves, and his marriage was going to be under massive scrutiny, and so all of that was swirling around him then as well. And that stuff is part of the Rooney story. Yeah,
it is. And I'm just actually thinking there, like, I haven't really thought about this, but it's like a snap test for you. And like maybe there's people who are sort of following, who are massive Manchester United fans out there who will put me wrong on this. But if I was to say to you, like, pick when you think of Wayne Rooney, right? Like, what are the 3-4 moments that stand out? What are the ones? So I'm thinking off the top of my head, the volley against Man City, or the stunning goal against Man City. I'm thinking of the one where he's talking to the referee and he scores that volley against Newcastle, the Everton one when he was a kid. And I'm kind of wondering, I guess what I'm saying is, like, how many of those are from the last 6-7 years of his career? Like, how many of them come after he was 25 or 26? And maybe people will correct me on that, and there's iconic ones that I'm forgetting. But it did seem that, like, from that point onwards, like, the thing about Rooney was that someone produced a stat that, like, he was never top scorer in a league-winning season. It was almost like, I remember he scored in the Champions League final against Barcelona, but they lost. He actually, and I think that at the time he scored the goal in the game, it was like, I think to get it back to 1-1, you're thinking, yes, this is Rooney, like, he's stepping up, he delivered, but he never necessarily, like, has delivered that absolute picture book front of the scrapbook, this won them the trophy.
Yeah.
Like, absolute defining moment, and like, he was part of, like, he won everything. So, I mean, that's obviously a very harsh read, but I guess what I'm saying is that so much of it is probably centered towards the early part of his career, and you almost forget, like, I don't think it's forgotten. I think Sam Wallace had a good piece the other day. I think it was used in our paper, like that. His relationship with Ferguson obviously was bad, for the last couple of years. And I even stumbled across some old quotes earlier. During the time of David Moyes, that very brief time, like, Rooney did manage to get himself a 5.5-year deal on very, very big money, which became a problem afterwards when he wasn't necessarily proving to be worth it. Yeah. And there's a Moyes quote where he actually spoke about going over to this is like, I mean, just all the Moyes quotes now haven't aged well, but it's sort of Moyes saying that he said to Rooney he thought he'd gone a little bit soft. That was a phrase that he'd used, and you're sort of thinking now, well, I mean, I'm not sure if he was that soft. He's just after getting a 5.5-year deal for 300 grand a week. He's obviously got something about him. But there's a certain, like, the deep sense of probably unfulfillment all comes with the fact that the second half of his Manchester United stay was so deprived of any moment that really stands out as special. Unless you're going to tell me I've forgotten one, but I can't really think of them.
No, I think your memory of it pretty much tallies with the stats I've been able to dig up here, while you were talking. So that year, that 2010 World Cup, that really could have been something for him, because he was the Players' Player of the Year for 2010, and he was the Football Writers Association Footballer of the Year 2010, and he was 5th in the voting for the 2011 Ballon d'Or, which effectively was the previous year. So right around then, and that ankle injury really was not good, and then the tabloid stuff and the way his life was had a major impact. But that 2010 season, he played, let me see here, and I get it for you. Yeah, he played 32 Premier League matches, scored 26 goals. That's serious going, 26 and 32. And in the Champions League, he scored 5 goals in 7 games. Again, that's a serious amount. And really, where it goes off a cliff is his last great year is 2012. 34 Premier League games, 27 goals. Again, 27 goals in 34 Premier League games, and again in the Champions League, his 2 best years in the Champions League, 7 games and 5 goals. So the following year in the Premier League, he goes from 27 Premier League goals down to 12. And then the rest of his career is, so it's 12, 17's not bad in 2014, 17 goals, but then it's like 12 goals, 8 goals in his last year. It's 5 goals. So it really does nosedive after 2011-12 territory. And the last great goal that you mentioned was the Man City overhead, which was in 2011. So, again, not to further extend the Ronaldo analogy, but right around the time Ronaldo goes from good to exceptional to all-time great is around the same time that Rooney nosedives from 5th in the Ballon d'Or to just, not bad by any means, but almost shadow of himself territory, which probably exacerbates that sense that as Ronaldo started to touch something, all time, Rooney was really nosediving. So yeah, no, your memory of it is pretty much bang on with the stats as well.
Yeah, it is striking though that David Moyler was on last Saturday and sort of raved about Rooney, and I think it's one of these things that, again, you're judged by the highest standards. So let's say, I don't know how many times he played against them, but do you ever notice sometimes with, like, I noticed it here, but also with the PFA sort of awards in England and the teams and stuff, that you might have someone like, Pogba, who's derided, yet he'll still get loads of votes in those things from other players, because while there's an outside perception that they're not delivering on their ability, for that player who plays against them once or twice in a season, it's like anyone at any level, you walk on the pitch with someone and you think, yeah, he's amazing. And yes, you're not thinking, well, he's amazing, but he's not as good as he used to be, because this is the only time you've encountered him, and like Moyler was even speaking a little bit about his pace even, which wouldn't be something that wouldn't necessarily spring to mind for me. And it's funny, like you mentioned John Giles, who always was such a big believer, a big fan. He always believed, didn't he, that Rooney could go and play deep in midfield. He always had this sort of feeling that he might, which I think he did eventually in the MLS to some degree. But so I think, like, people who shared a pitch with him, like, just once or a couple of times, didn't judge things very harshly, like in the way the commentators from the outside do.
Yeah.
That he just had that greatness that was apparent to them. But as you say, you put him alongside Ronaldo, which is the highest, like, but you're talking about, we always say, when will we ever get another Messi and Ronaldo? Like, that's definitely going to stand the test of time. It's unfortunate that he's compared to them. It's a compliment that he is, but yeah, you're right. Like, it doesn't match up. I mean, Ronaldo, is still playing a big part in, winning Euro 2016 and Champions Leagues and other tournaments by the time where Rooney just couldn't do it anymore. But again, it comes back to, like, did he look after himself enough? I mean, I remember, like, didn't Darren Gibson left Manchester United basically under a cloud quite suddenly, and part of it was he'd been, I think, out with Wayne Rooney around that time, and there was a story where there was a couple of them out, and obviously Rooney couldn't be shown the door because he was that important, but even just the fact that he was involved in that, it probably planted a seed about maybe his mentality, which he probably never quite shook off. And yet now, but isn't it? I think I'm very interested by his managerial career, because sometimes actually it's you'll find that the lads who maybe weren't like flawless pros, who made some mistakes, actually end up becoming good managers because they have a real understanding of players who occasionally make those mistakes. And you've heard great things in recent years about Rooney's influence at Derby as a player when he came back, that he really does have an amazing life experience, even a more rounded life experience than others who were consistent all the way. And you kind of wonder how he'll apply that to his managerial career. It could be very interesting.
Yeah. And like, there's so many mitigating factors when you're being fair to Rooney. Like on the pace point, and it's never talked about Rooney, but if you think back to that 08 season, that Tevez, Ronaldo, Rooney partnership for those 2 years, how many breakaway goals did Rooney more than keep pace with Ronaldo running the length of the field? You know, and maybe it's his body shape, but you probably don't appreciate how fast he is. Yeah, like lightning quick. And you can imagine trying to keep pace with him as a defender or as a David Myler. And the other thing to remember as well, for years of Rooney's peak, Ferguson played him at times out of position. Often, you know, in some of his real peak years, he was shunted, particularly in the Champions League, out to the left-hand side. Not like left of a front three, but pretty much like a 4-5-1. And in that instance, he was just a victim of his brilliant, brilliant team ethic and attitude. Ronaldo couldn't be trusted to do that job. Maybe Ronaldo, the more natural winger, was like put in the centre, and Rooney, sorry, you're just going to have to trek up and down the left wing. And like Rooney did it. And we underestimate that kind of greatness as well, which if you're, you know, a pro's pro, I suspect is absolutely invaluable. You know, like it's to his unbelievable credit that he was willing to do that for the team. Gary Neville.
It happened with England as well. Remember the World Cup in 2014? You were there. I can't remember if you were at any England games, but he was actually shunted out to the wing a bit at times. But in some respects, you could spin that as being damning too, because
he wasn't the Ronaldo of that team.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't building a team around him, and it was more a case of maybe they were accommodating him because they had to, rather than. You know, you start with him and you build the blocks around him.
You see, 14 is actually a good point. If you're picking that up from 2010, which is a kind of what could have been maybe. By 14, it's kind of over. It's gone. You know, he's on the way down.
Yet still breaking some records at that stage and being acclaimed as a legend, which he will be remembered as ultimately. It's just the grades of it.
Yeah. Gary Neville said on Monday Night Football that, you know, he just understandably wasn't getting into comparing Rooney to Bobby Charlton or Stanley Matthews or people he hasn't seen play, but he said he's the best centre forward certainly that he had played with at Manchester United. Cantona, Hughes, York, Cole, Tevez, Berbatov. He had Rooney right there beside Ronaldo in his kind of all-time team and just raved about him. So like, I think you're right when you say our assessment is harsh. It's real, like, you know, sitting on the sidelines, journalists kind of being too smart for their own good, taking this broad stroke.
Why journalists are so popular when people rate their professions.
You know? And almost just looking for an impossible standard. But hopefully we've kind of explained where we're coming from. In the main, it's because he was so promising and so electric for more than just a year, more than just 2 years. Like, there was a trajectory there for 4 or 5 years where this thing was like, my God, when Rooney's 27, and that didn't happen. And look, it's funny, my brain come quite quickly here. I was about to say maybe that's what happens when you play when you're 16, but then Ronaldo played when he was 16.
But he's a sort of, I suppose, a freakish example.
He is a freakish example.
Isn't it interesting though with someone like Mbappe? You know, like we'll see how will we speak about him when he's 27, 28, because he looked ready to take over the world. You know, in Russia, and I mean, he's won the World Cup. He's climbed the highest peak, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. Is it just me? Like, or we don't talk of him in the same breath now. You know, so like it just happens that way for a lot of players too. You know, so I'm sure he'll be fine. Like, you know, but it's more in some respects the remarkable ability of Ronaldo and Messi to stay at that level all the way through.
No, they're freakish.
Unbelievable.
They're freakish. And to be fair as well, one last point, and we'll move on because I know there's a lot of other stories we wanted to touch on. It is also grossly unfair to look at his unbelievable feats as a youngster. And when I say youngster, I'm talking like up to the age of 25, 26, you know, to be fair, even, you know, a little bit 27, and almost hold them against him as opposed to saying, look how good he was, you know. And Michael Owen gets this too. You know, there's a sense of, and Owen's a more extreme case. Instead of, looking at how great Owen was for a couple of years, it's like, well, didn't quite happen for Michael Owen. And like Rooney did all those things we're talking about up until he was 25, 26. Like he did them. He scored in Champions League final in 2011 as well against Barcelona.
Yeah, which is
So they happened. You know, they weren't just like, oh well, this is the dress rehearsal and we're about to see what he really does when he's 29. That, you know, and so that can creep into the conversation.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I think you spoke to Owen, I think, was it before, and other places where Owen can, you know, can really articulate his experience now. And I'm just thinking, like, it's not long. I mean, like Rooney has done those brilliant columns in the Sunday Times, you know, really sort of, again, like tackling the perception that probably existed of him when he was younger because of his background, let's be blunt, you know, and mistakes that he made, very public mistakes that he made. But actually, like, it suggests that, like, he was accumulating knowledge along the way, you know, and he's able, and that's why, as I said, I'm like, you'd be very interested to hear him when enough water is passed under the bridge, how he reflects on it, and maybe when he works with a couple of prodigious talents himself, how he deals with them. And that's definitely, you know, you definitely feel that there's more in his story to come.
Yeah, good texting by Paul, maybe to finish on. Rooney delivered plenty of other